right, so it started recording now as well.
Right.
We might just give it a minute or so because there were a few more that had registered.
Yeah, we can wait for 2-3 more minutes. That should be good.
Yeah. Well, do we want to start and then people can trickle in as we go? Is that all right? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining tonight. I'm Jackie Henwood and I'm the Research Project Manager at CERA, so Centre for Eye Research Australia. I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight's webinar, which will be discussing bridging the translational chasm of artificial intelligence in healthcare. So this is our 10th workshop. It's part of a series discussing artificial intelligence in healthcare, from data to algorithm to real world solutions. These workshops are supported by the Medical Research Future Fund, and our goal is to connect the diverse skills of clinicians, researchers, and healthcare workers with computer and AI scientists. Therefore, we're trying to get everyone working together to develop and build artificial intelligence solutions for real-world healthcare challenges. So before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we connect tonight via our computers, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. So tonight we are really lucky to have Associate Professor Sandeep Reddy with us. So there will be a question and answer at the end. So if you do have any questions, do pop them in the chat, and whether Sandeep wants to go to them during the talk or at the end, we'll leave that up to his preference there. So I would like to start by introducing you all to Associate Professor Sandeep Reddy. So he is he's an artificial intelligence in healthcare researcher based at the Deakin School of Medicine. He's also the founder and chairman of Medi-AI, a globally focused AI company. He also functions as a certified health informatician, and in World Health Organization recognized digital health expert. Further, he's fellow of the Australasian Institute of Digital Health and a certified health executive with the Australasian College of Health Service Management. He has a medical and healthcare management background and has completed machine learning, health informatics training from various sources. He's currently engaged in research about the safety, quality, and explainability of the application of AI in healthcare delivery, in addition to developing AI models to treat and manage chronic diseases. So without further ado, I'll pass you back on to Sandeep.
Thanks, Jackie, for the kind introduction. Let me share my screen. Today, I'd really like to focus on the translational aspects of AI in healthcare. Obviously, you come from different backgrounds. Some of you come with a technical background, quite well versed with the technical aspects of artificial intelligence. Some of you may come from a clinical background and very acquainted with the challenges that occur in clinical care delivery. I want to kind of bring together those two different diverse fields and see how we can bridge that gap, bringing AI from the bench to the bedside. But before I go further, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands upon whom we gather, and pay respects to the elders past and present. So the outline for today's presentation is briefly we'll talk about AI application in healthcare. I won't spend too much time in that. Obviously, you've heard of AI application in healthcare and from different sources and in different mediums. I will more try to spend time on the application and the translational aspects. And then we'll talk about the issues that occur with implementation of AI in healthcare. It's not good enough to end the presentation with problems. We do need to discuss solutions, and we'll spend some time discussing the solutions. Not just my perspective, but I'll also seek your opinion as to what might be the solutions to address the current translational issues with AI in healthcare. Now, we need to be on the same page as to our understanding of what translational medicine means. It's basically the path or the process from early stage proof of concept to a final medical product. In other simple terms, it's the journey from the bench to bedsides in any medical concepts or medical applications. Now, unlike the popular misconception that artificial intelligence is a new phenomenon, artificial intelligence has been around for several decades now. If you look at general artificial intelligence, it's been around for nearly 60, 70 years. And then when you look at application of artificial intelligence medicine, tracing back to the expert systems that came about in the 1970s, that's been around, we have around 60 years of history of artificial intelligence application in medicine. So the concept of artificial intelligence per se is not new to medicine. It's only the type of artificial intelligence that we are talking about that's new to medicine, that's deep learning. And that's really revolutionized the way we utilize artificial intelligence, but also the potential of artificial intelligence in medicine. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I won't spend too much time in how artificial intelligence is applied in medicine, but I do want to briefly mention that there is no field of medicine, no discipline of medicine that's left untouched by artificial intelligence. In fact, every discipline of medicine and subdiscipline of medicine has some use case for artificial intelligence. And you see several studies, papers actually discussing this. But generally, when you look at the way artificial intelligence is being applied in healthcare, you can categorize them into whether it's in the computer vision category or it's in the natural language processing category or clinical decision support systems and so forth. And we're definitely going to see more of these applications as the years progress and more of this integration happening. But I want to definitely want to kind of now go on to discuss the translational aspects. But before we get to that point, let's take a stop. Let's take where we are at with in terms of application of artificial intelligence in medicine. If you look at the maturity levels, utilization of artificial intelligence, specifically convolutional neural networks in the past and nowadays transformers in analyzing medical images like X-rays, CT scans, MRI scans, and histopathological images has matured to quite a degree. In fact, the other day we have heard of semi-autonomous or autonomous AI applications being approved in the European Union or in the European continent for analyzing X-rays. So we've come to a great deal of maturity in terms of analyzing medical images. We've also seen some level of maturity with health chatbots. In the next couple of years, 5 to 10 years, we're going to be seeing more of medical triaging, clinical decision support systems being utilized in healthcare delivery, clinical care delivery, but also utilization of artificial intelligence in remote health management. We've already seen some examples in the pandemic context, but we're going to see more of that. We're also going to see many virtual health coaching applications, whether it's on your mobile or it's through on your computers. We're going to see more of that happening. And 25 to 30 years, it's all speculation now, but we are likely to see some autonomous robotic surgery. Indeed, we have already seen trials for autonomous robotic surgery happen in the United States. And 25 to 30 years, we are likely to see some sort of autonomous robotic surgery happening. And some people speculate there may be also independent AI clinicians in whatever form that may be. Now that we got the application of artificial intelligence in healthcare under the way, we need to now do a reality check where we are at now. Indeed, when we look at the AI in healthcare landscape, there are very few AI systems in clinical settings.
Sandeep,
very few.
Sorry, someone just raised their hand. They might have a question for you before you move on. That was all.
No worries, Jackie. Happy to take the question.
Yeah, Pranay? You have a question? Okay, maybe it was a mistake. Sorry. I'll leave you to I'll unmute it back. Sorry.
That's okay, Jackie. So there are very few AI systems that are actually used in clinical context. You may say we're seeing a lot of AI publications coming in through discussing AI application in various fields of medicine. We are seeing a lot of media coverage, but they are really restricted to a controlled environment, laboratory, in silico environments. We don't necessarily see those AI applications actually being utilized by clinicians in your hospitals or in your primary care settings. Very few settings have that sort of instance of AI being used. And also when we review clinical guidelines, which are sort of the standards and the guidelines for clinical practitioners in different contexts, we don't see any AI system being recommended for use. And if we don't have that recommendation coming through clinical guidelines, I can find it very hard for clinicians to actually adopt AI in the clinical context. And as I mentioned earlier, most AI medicine studies that we are seeing are exploratory, they're not confirmatory. What do we mean by confirmatory? We don't see validation studies like external validation studies. We don't see clinical trials confirming the utility of AI studies. So a lot of studies are just exploring the potential for artificial intelligence use in a particular field, but not necessarily confirming the clinical value or the clinical outcome of that particular application. So you can start to see that in reality, there is much to be done in terms of AI adoption, but AI also integration into healthcare. Now, why is that so? For that, we had to step back a bit and take a wide perspective as to what healthcare service delivery is. When you look at healthcare service delivery, it boils down to be a personal transaction between clinicians and patients, and something that comes in between obviously would meet some level of resistance either from the clinician or from the patient. And in this case, we are talking about AI coming as an intermediary between the clinician and the patient, or even substituting a clinician in certain instances that obviously would lead to some sort of level of resistance. Obviously, this is not a technical problem, it's more of a social problem, but indeed is a confronting problem that we need to address to enable AI adoption in healthcare. The second factor is when we see media coverage about AI replacing human clinicians, many clinicians obviously are laughing about that because as clinicians can understand, we utilize various human traits like creativity, emotional intelligence, and perception in making our clinical judgment. And at this level, at this stage, we don't see any AI application being able to replicate that. We haven't seen that. Maybe many years into the future, with the emergence of artificial general intelligence or strong AI, that could be possible, but we don't have any AI application that can necessarily replicate those human traits. The third reason, we already discussed that very few AI studies are externally validated, and there are very many technical issues because the technical explanation around that. But in terms of translational medicine, if you don't have a clinical trial, you're assessing the validity of an application, it's very unlikely for clinicians to adopt it. The next factor is that as clinicians, we utilize various sources to make our clinical judgment, and this signals that are coming in from whether lab values or from the physical examination of the patient or other sources. We utilize these various sources, heterogeneous sources, to make a judgment. And then when you look at AI applications, the way they're developed, especially machine learning applications, they're usually trained on homogeneous data. Nowadays, we see multimodal analysis happening, but that's pretty much a newer phenomenon. In the past, a lot of machine learning applications used to be trained on homogeneous data, and then you would determine particular features coming out of that data set, and then you would expect the machine learning model to identify those features. So it was trained on a particular narrow data sets and homogeneous data sets, but that's not how it works in clinical environment. The last one is pretty important. We've seen a lot of studies identify biases when you utilize AI studies. We'll talk about that a bit more detail in further slides, but I do want to mention that we have seen AI applications introduce some biases. Obviously, as human clinicians, we do have some biases, but it's unacceptable for an AI application to introduce new biases in the clinical treatment and management. And let's spend some more time walking through those issues. Here we see a representation of how a clinical AI application is developed. And many of you come from a technical background, so you're quite aware of what this is. The way we begin with is we conceptualize what the problem is. We review what the problem is, and then we conceptualize a solution to that. And based on that architecture, we start to build a machine learning model. To train a machine learning model, we obviously need data sets. We go about in acquiring data sets, and then we split up the data sets into training and test data sets. And then we start to develop the AI application or the machine learning model. And then we test it, whether it's on internal data sets or on external data sets. And then we apply it in a healthcare environment. So that's the kind of high-level overview of how a machine learning model is developed. It seems pretty straightforward and some sort of linear process there happening. But when you look at reality, the kind of data that we need to acquire to train these machine learning models, it comes from various data points, it comes from various sources, and it's not necessarily linear. For example, what you see on the slide is how a patient journeys through a hospital system or through a clinical system. And you can see that data comes from various points. So it's not it's not simple in the way we can acquire the data. It's pretty complex. And in fact, it can get more complex. Here is a representation of the data points in an ICU, intensive care unit. And as you can see, it's pretty messy and very complex. So it's not so straightforward to be able to get data, especially real-time data, and train machine learning models. So most of the time when we train machine learning models in a control environment, then deploy it in a very complex environment, they fail because of this, because of inability to be able to adapt to this complex systems. Now, we talked earlier about biases. Let's spend some time on this. So we know that as human beings, we do have biases, whether it is clinicians or just as general in our general affairs, we have biases. But when we are introducing artificial intelligence in a clinical environment, the expectation is that it would not introduce additional biases, or it would not create circumstances where it would discriminate against patient populations. But that's what is happening. We have seen several studies where machine learning models have been introduced, whether it's in a healthcare environment or whether it's in the banking sector, discriminating against particular populations. If we extrapolate those kind of instances that have occurred in other parts of the world to Australia, we may be really concerned, because that could exacerbate the health disparities that we already see between the rest of the population and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So they're definitely concerned about this introduction of the biases that are coming with AI applications. You may ask, how do these biases come about? First, they come from the use of incomplete data sets or in non-representative data sets. We've seen overseas a lot of machine learning models are trained on predominantly white populations, but then they utilize the AI applications that are trained so on general populations which have a diverse population, not just white populations, and that could lead to biases and discrimination. And the next point is really important. So we'll talk about that shortly in terms of the solutions, but we know with deep learning models that there is a black box issue. For those who are not aware of what this black box issue is, it's basically deep learning models because of the many layers through which the data goes through, and then we get better performance because of this many layered sort of architecture, computational architecture. It also leads to opacity in decision making. That, in other words, we don't know how the decision was arrived at. This might seem trivial in case of you wanting to look at purchasing a car or purchasing a new fashion that's come out. But if you were to use that kind of opaque models in a medical environment, that becomes a big concern, especially in risky situations where an AI model makes a decision which may kind of contravene what your general or accepted medical decision making is. But even though it may be accurate, it's still, if it kind of contravenes the accepted model of decision making, it definitely poses concerns. So there is a level of expectation that AI models in healthcare are transparent, and many of the deep learning models aren't. So that's a concern too. And the next point that I make here is looking into the future. Maybe it's not so much an issue right now, but it could be an issue looking into the future. What if AI models start to have that level of accuracy that stakeholders decide is good enough to replace doctors, and basically completely rely on the AI application in terms of medical decision making? So that obviously takes away the power from human clinicians and relegates it to AI applications. In other words, computational intelligence. So that could lead, this could cause consternation and could cause problems in adoption of AI in healthcare. The last one is pretty important. Even though it's not a technical problem, it's a real and immediate problem that AI in healthcare faces, and that's the trust issue. In certain instances, certain contexts, you see that clinicians have this mistrust of AI, even though the AI application has done very well in all the tests and has shown high degree of accuracy and performance. It still may not be accepted by clinicians because they don't have trust in it. On the other hand, you could also have patients who may mistrust or may not have trust in AI, even though the clinician watches for that AI application. The patient may not choose to see that particular doctor who uses AI, or that particular health service which uses AI. So there are remedial measures to address this. We'll talk about it a bit later, but for now, keep in mind these ethical challenges that face AI adoption in healthcare. The next one often gets ignored, but is pretty important, is the regulatory process in which various regulatory bodies, whether it's the Food and Drug Administration in the United States and the Therapeutic Goods Administration here in Australia, that regulate the medical devices. They approve the medical devices for use in clinical environments or in healthcare environments. Obviously, they need to be convinced any application that they approve for clinical decision making, clinical treatment is of the highest safety and quality. And right now in Australia, we don't have a customized or a set process for approving AI devices. We have white papers and discussion, but we still don't have that. But we do have templates or models that are developed in the United States. In fact, the Food and Drug Administration has been very pioneering in introducing AI-specific approval systems. They also have fast-track approval systems to enable the faster approval of AI applications. So we do have some ability to borrow lessons from overseas, and even UK has also been looking at those fast-track processes. So, but it's not uniform across the world. We see various countries still struggling and still trying to fathom how they can introduce process to monitor and approve AI systems. So those challenges also reside. Now, the next challenge is to do with a medical legal perspective. Though I don't come from a legal background, I'm quite aware that there are a lot of issues that lie in terms of the legal end of things when AI applications get introduced in healthcare. A specific problem that is often being discussed is who becomes responsible if things go wrong. Say there's a mishap and some patient unfortunately dies, and they need to accord blame onto somebody or to make sure who is responsible for that from an audit perspective. There isn't really a specific medical legal framework that can address who becomes responsible, but there's been a lot of discussion. I've seen quite a few papers come through, but also been part of some discussions where they've discussed how to address that. We'll talk about solutions, but do bear in mind that it's unclear at this stage how the legal framework would react, or what legal framework would you apply in the instance when things go wrong. Now, considering all these challenges, you may say, why bother? Let's not even look at artificial intelligence. Let's discard it. It's got too many problems. And let's look at other sources or other solutions to address our healthcare problems. I respectfully disagree with that opinion, because even though I've raised those issues, I have a balanced perspective and I do have optimism as to the potential for artificial intelligence, but also quite acutely aware of the significant health challenges that the healthcare system face. For example, doesn't matter which part of the world, we have a significant problem in terms of workforce. That is, basically we face an excessive demand but inadequate supply of doctors, nurses, allied health workers in order to address that demand. And as the population ages in the developed countries, we start to see there is more and more demand for healthcare. And unfortunately, our educational systems that train doctors and nurses hasn't kept up with that demand. So we still see a significant shortage of workforce, and that really hasn't been addressed in spite of new new medical schools being open, new courses being open. We still face that shortage. So we don't have a solution, and AI can be a solution, especially if it can augment or lessen the burden of clinicians, in that sense that they can spend more time on the clinical management and less time on the administrative and the mundane tasks. So AI can be a solution in this regard. The second issue is to do with the limited access to high quality healthcare. Again, this is a universal issue, not restricted to a particular country or context. We're talking about both financial barriers and geographical barriers that prevent patients from accessing healthcare. If you talk about rural and remote areas where you don't have enough healthcare, So those situations demand an alternative solution to what's been explored. Again, AI can be a solution. We have seen utilization of combination of artificial intelligence and telehealth models that have been able to kind of reach out to and provide healthcare services to remote and regional populations. So again, AI can be a solution here. The next issue is a sad issue. It's to do with the medical errors that happen because of human biases or human errors, or it may be because of technical errors. And that leads to, unfortunately, to adverse events and even sometimes patient deaths. Again, AI, through its ability to standardize systems to be able to identify and detect errors, can be a solution in this regard. The last issue, which I would like to bring up here, is probably not a big issue here in Australia, but it's definitely an issue in the United States and in some other countries, where physicians had to document a lot of stuff on the electronic health record in other mediums, and that leads to excess of burden on the physicians, leading to their burnout. Again, AI can be a solution through, especially through the natural language processing abilities, to be able to create EHR templates or documents for physicians, and thus lessening the burden on physicians. So you can start to see that AI provides a well-rounded solution to many of the current challenges in healthcare. So that's why I insist that we can't discard artificial intelligence as a solution, and we should explore the utility of artificial intelligence further rather than abandoning our pursuit of utilization of artificial intelligence. Now, how can we address these issues? So I don't want to make this webinar a lecture. I would like to get you involved. Right now, we have 20 participants online. So I encourage you to now go to this website. I'm going to copy and paste this in the chat function. So I already see quite a few questions coming there. I may take a moment to review them while I ask you to follow this web link. And if you go to the web link, you should come to this website. And this is basically a Padlet. What you need to do is at the bottom right-hand corner, you will see a plus sign. And here I would just click on the plus sign, and you should be able to then enter your answers. What I'm seeking your perspective is, now that you reviewed all the challenges that AI faces in healthcare, what can we do about this? How can we address these challenges? Your answer can be as long as you want or as brief as you want. Doesn't really matter. There's no right or wrong answer, but I do seek your perspective because that will enable a discussion. Because I will provide my perspective shortly, but I do want to know what you think could be the solutions. Even if you are cynical about the whole AI issue, that's fine. You can add your perspective, but encourage you to please provide your perspective. It's pretty easy to offer your opinions. All you need to do is go onto this web link, go to the website, click on the plus sign on the bottom right-hand corner, a pop-up window should open, and then you just enter your information, and then the information will be entered on the board for everybody to see. Again, you can remain anonymous, so your names won't be displayed.
Sandeep, sorry, when you share the link, did you press everyone? Because a few people are saying they haven't got it.
I put it in the chat function, so it's there on the chat function, so everybody can.
But when you share it there, it says two, and you might need to click down and say everyone.
I gotcha.
It's all right, Jack and Jackie have already shared it.
Oh, sorry, I could have done that too. Yeah. Sorry, Sandeep. Yep, that was smart.
Yeah, but the only thing is there seems like we need to sign up, so we are able to leave a message there.
Does it require a signing process?
Yes, I can't do anything. I can see the background picture, but I can't see the plus sign. So try to.
It should be in the bottom right corner.
I didn't have the plus sign either. I thought it might just be me though.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll leave it at that then, because if it's throwing a barrier to go onto the, unless I check if I can make it open access. What about others? Any of you online can get onto the Padlet? If not, we'll just have to close it and maybe look at your responses in the chat function or other means. Okay, it looks like several of you are having issues with the Padlet, so we'll probably revert back to seeking your perspective. You can leave your comments on the chat function, and it works as well as the Padlet. In that sense, you're still entering your information. What I'm seeking is, what do you think we can do to address these various issues that I've discussed earlier, the implementation issues, the ethical issues, the regulatory issues, the medical legal issues. The technical challenges I haven't gone through, but there are also a lot of technical challenges like data drift and technical integration issues, cloud infrastructure issues, computational issues. So whatever, we do have some real problems that occur with AI application in healthcare. So what do you think we could do to address those issues? You don't have to provide comprehensive an answer, just some brief perspectives as to what you think we can go about in terms of addressing them. You're being awfully shy. I'm starting to see some solutions coming through. Excellent. Ethan says some solutions to the presented issues is using AI as just a screening tool. Thus, the final decision still lies with a clinician, which would hopefully reduce errors. A very, very good point. Excellent point indeed. To be able to address those trust issues that clinicians face, but also making sure that we are realistic about the abilities of artificial intelligence. At this stage, we don't have any artificial intelligence that can pretty much autonomously operate, even though there's been some recent news about use of autonomous artificial intelligence in diabetic retinopathy and screening, and also chest X-ray screening. Other responses, having a proper standard, such as fast health interoperability regulations. Current issue of not having a standard means large investment to get started in the first place. Such a good point. Indeed, there's work being done by the International Telecommunications Union, which is a United Nations body. They're in fact developing standard protocols for the application of artificial intelligence in various medical areas. I encourage you to visit their website to see the current progress. In fact, they invite anybody to come and join their working groups. Fantastic point there. So next one is a question. We'll deal with questions and answers towards the end, Jackie, if that's okay. At this stage, I'm really looking at trying to see the audience's perspective as to the solutions. Again, an excellent insight from Ethan. There is also explainable AI models which highlight the areas within a medical image. And I'll be talking about some of the explainable AI frameworks. So that's a really good point. Ethan is referring to the challenge where there is lack of transparency with deep learning models. And if you have such kind of models in acute clinical environments, they may not be well accepted by clinicians if they don't know how the decision making was arrived at, even if the performance is to a high degree of accuracy. All right. So in the interest of time, we'll move on to my perspective as to what can be the solutions. Mind you, this is my perspective. Others may have a different opinion as to how you address those solutions. But some of my perspective comes from peer-reviewed publications, including some of mine. So they've already been sort of reviewed and have been, in a way, been tested by others. But again, it's my perspective. I believe we need to kind of look at the problems that lie ahead with AI adoption in particular groups. Some others may have a different way of looking at things. This is my way. And the problems can be grouped into technology and infrastructure problems, policy problems, and governance problems. You can address them sequentially or in parallel or in any way you choose, but I believe the way to look at the problems is to group them into particular categories and then go about in addressing them. The first problems lie in technology and infrastructure. There are many, many technical problems, and I won't spend too much time on it because, again, because of the interest of time. But one issue, as Ethan mentioned, there is an issue with the transparency, and there are solutions to address that black box issue. Again, to reiterate and to make sure we're on the same page as to what I mean by black box is the problem that lies with deep learning models because of the multi-layers in between the input and the output layer, that the decision-making process is mathematically difficult to analyze. And in consequence, that means we really want to understand how exactly the decision-making was arrived at. And this can create problems in clinical medicine, mainly because that would lead to a lack of trust in the users. And we know that in medicine, trust is paramount. And if you don't have that trust, it becomes hard for AI to be adopted. The other reason why this might be a problem is, as human beings, we need to understand what reasoning went behind a decision. And we seek that explanation from the human doctor when a medical advice is given to us. And if we can't get that from an AI application, it becomes hard for the patients to accept it. And the other reasons why we need to be concerned about lack of explainability, here is a good illustration of that particular instance. So you can see on the left-hand side, there is an image of a panda. And then you develop a machine learning model basically trying to detect panda images. But then you manipulate some of the pixels with the images that are trained, that train the machine learning model or that test the machine learning model. And suddenly the machine learning model detects that particular image as a given. So you really don't know why that happened. You manipulated some pixels, and that could happen even in real life circumstances where you have developed a machine learning model to detect, say, for example, pneumonia in a chest X-ray, and you may have a hacker manipulating the chest X-ray through the PACS system in the hospital or through other systems, through the radiology information system, and then that could lead to detection of a pneumonia in a person who is normal. So you can start to see the dangers of lack of explainability. So this is another instance sort of picking up on that. On the left-hand side, you can see on the top-hand side, you can see the a machine learning model is trying to detect a horse, and the images that are used to train the machine learning model had a source label or a source tag present. And once that source tag was removed, the machine learning model was unable to detect the horse. So basically, the machine learning model was confounding the source tag to the horse. And once the source tag was removed, it seemed very helpless. And likewise, on the right-hand side, the same thing happened in identifying a car. Training images had a source tag, and once the source tag was removed, it was unable to identify the car. This is a very recent example that came across from a reputable source. I really liked it. So here you can see images of wolves and huskies. So the machine learning model was trained to distinguish between a wolf and a husky, and it seemed going very well according to the developers or according to the researchers. The machine learning model was able to detect the wolf, and where it found an husky, it was able to detect an husky. But this image shows something going really, really wrong here. So again, interest of time, ideally, I would like to seek your perspective as to what may be the issue, but in the interest of time, I'll give you the answer. So you can see all throughout, the prediction is wolf, and the ground reality or ground truth is that it is a wolf in many instances, and where it is husky. But if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, the prediction is wolf, but the actual reality, it's a husky. So that really points out to the problem in this particular machine learning model. What it was doing was it was sort of confounding, or it was aligning the snow background to the presence of wolf. And whenever there was snow, it thought it was a wolf. So it was really not being trained on detecting the wolf, but it was being trained to detect the snow. And whenever there was snow, it would identify that particular image as a wolf. So you can start to see that machine learning models are really not very intelligent. And if you don't have that ability to capture those errors or that derive that explainability, this might be posing a problem, and you can extrapolate it to a medical situation and realize the gravity of such kind of errors. Fortunately, we are starting to see the emergence of several solutions to address this explainability problem. And there are post hoc solutions, there are intrinsic solutions, and so forth. But here we are looking at some of the post hoc solutions. And as Ethan mentioned earlier, we're starting to see some explainable AI frameworks. In the interest of time, I won't discuss the details of each of explainable AI frameworks, but we have explainable AI frameworks at the global and the local level, but also model specific and model agnostic. Some of you may have heard of Lime and Shapley values and those kind of explainable AI frameworks, but there are a lot of other models that are being introduced, like GradCam for medical imaging analysis. Recently, I published an article in one of the premier medical informatics journals, Lancet Digital Health, where I advocated for the continued use of explainable AI frameworks, because some of the researchers and some of the stakeholders have questioned the value of explainable AI frameworks, because at this stage, we still have not a very mature explainable AI solutions. And some people have said, why do we have to spend so much time on it? Just let's discard that explainable AI frameworks and focus on other ways of interpreting deep learning or addressing the deep learning issues, like clinical validation and so forth. But I've vigorously argued against that notion and said we still need to place a lot of attention on explainable AI frameworks, because that will lead to increased interpretability of the AI process, and that leads to better comprehension for end users, and that leads to reasonable and data-driven decisions, and eventually leads to evidence-based medicine and higher quality care. Now, that was in brief the discussion of how we can address the transparency issues. Again, let's keep moving in the interest of time. So here, again, there are many policy solutions, but one of the issues that we often see with AI model development is the AI validation, external validation, AI integration with healthcare information systems is always an afterthought. It's not thought quite early in the cycle. It's not thought when you conceptualize the solution or when you're starting to train the model. It becomes an afterthought, and this is becoming a major concern. In order to kind of address that, myself and my co-authors, we developed an evaluation framework to serve two purposes. One is to assess the existing AI models, whether they can be utilized in the clinical environment, in the healthcare environment, and how well they integrate with the information systems or with the clinical systems. And the second purpose is to guide the vendors, developers, and researchers to ensure whenever they develop any machine learning solutions for healthcare problems that they actually think through what are the different issues that may come across in the future. And in that way, they develop translational models. So again, I recommend you to actually review the paper rather than me go in detail, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of key components in that in the evaluation framework that includes 3 main components: capability, utility, and adoption. And between those 3 components, you have 15 subcomponents. But capability really assesses the intrinsic capacity of the model. It assesses whether the model works very well in terms of internal validity measures and external validity measures. And utility really is talking about the general external utility of the model, where in terms of its safety and quality, transparency, privacy, and the potential harm it may cause to patients. The third one is really important that often gets ignored in other evaluation frameworks or in other assessment frameworks is the adoption aspect, is how well the model actually integrates into the healthcare service. So you can see it's a comprehensive evaluation framework. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just used to assess the existing AI applications. It can also be used to guide potential AI applications. Therefore, it is an evaluation framework that can be used at any point of the AI development and deployment cycle, as you can see on the illustration. Now, last aspect I want to cover is the governance aspect. We've seen innumerable number of articles, reports, discourse about ethics of AI application in medicine, but we really need to move from the ethical discussion to actually seeing how we can create frameworks to absorb or incorporate ethical dimensions in the application. Considering that a couple of years ago, myself and my co-author, we again published an article discussing a potential governance framework, not just covering the ethical dimensions, but also covering the previously discussed regulatory challenges and medico-legal challenges. And in that particular governance framework, which was published in the Journal of American Medical Informatics, we discussed 4 components: fairness, transparency, trustworthiness, and accountability. Let's spend some quick time reviewing each of those components. From a fairness point of view, I propose that we need to consider in the very beginning, when we acquire data sets, a data governance panel, basically inviting representatives from the patient community, from the clinician community, and from data scientists, so that you ensure that the data that you use to train machine learning models is representative of the population you're targeting, but is also not having any biases. In that way, you preempt any or you mitigate any emergence of any biases. Also introducing ethical benchmarks and measures to monitor throughout the application and testing of the AI applications has been recommended in that particular governance framework. From a transparency point of view, we talked about use of explainable AI frameworks, but better still, why not use intrinsically transparent AI algorithms like linear regression, decision tree making models. Those kind of things are intrinsically transparent. In fact, sometimes they actually work better on smaller data sets than deep learning models. So the first preference is to actually use intrinsically explainable AI models. But if that doesn't work, then you start to use the explainable AI frameworks that we discussed earlier, but also consider regular audits to ensure that the AI model is working very well and it's not causing any undue harm on patients or not providing any misleading diagnosis. So it's important to ensure that transparency aspect is assessed throughout. The next aspect is from a trustworthiness perspective. We talked about how potentially, even if the AI model is working very well, it can lead to, there can be mistrust in the clinician community, but also amongst the patients. That has to be addressed. And how can we address that? We can address that through education. Recently, myself and a co-author, we published a book chapter discussing the elements that need to be covered in educating people about AI in healthcare, especially when you consider clinicians. They need to be aware of what AI is and what applications they're using so that they can have more trust and confidence in what they're using. So in that book chapter, we discuss a couple of key elements that are to be covered in any educational courses that include topics relating to governance, topics relating to translational aspects, and topics relating to fundamental aspects of AI. So again, just as you educate clinicians, there is also a need to educate patients, maybe not so much in detail as you would do with clinicians, but there is definitely an effort you need to undertake to educate patients about AI. The last aspect in the governance framework is accountability. Remember, we talked about that issue in the medical legal perspective about who becomes responsible for things when things go wrong with use of AI. That could potentially be a challenge. A lot of health services may be afraid or not very confident in utilizing AI because they may be worried that if things go wrong, they become responsible. In order to address that, there are various measures that we introduced in that paper, but one of the things I wanted to highlight is there is a possibility of introducing an insurance scheme that covers specifically that AI application. In that way, both health services and also vendors feel much more empowered to be able to develop and introduce AI applications. In that sense, if there was things to go wrong, the insurance scheme can cover those liabilities and any other penalties that may arise. So that was my perspective. I don't want to be overtly biased by just introducing my perspective to you. I also want to cover some other perspectives. And this is a nice perspective, and this is a nice view of how AI can be adopted into healthcare by Sandeep et al. It was a recent publication. So basically, they discuss, if you include the 0 phase, there are 5 phases through which AI models can be introduced into healthcare. In the first phase, they emphasize discussing the clinical problem and with the clinicians so that you make sure that it is fit for purpose, and then see if there are already existing models instead of developing de novo models or altogether a greenfield model. You basically look for other AI models. If there's not any particular AI model that suits you, then you start to develop and customize or a specific AI model. But in the next phase, that's phase 1, you basically ensure that the data that you acquire is free of biases, and you undertake constant evaluation, as we discussed in my slides. So you can start to see even this framework is kind of aligning with what I have discussed. But again, it provides a different perspective. Then in the phase 2, you externally validate the model. You'll be surprised about how many AI applications that are introduced, whether into the market or whether they're published, don't have external validation. So they emphasize external validation here. In the next phase, they also emphasize the use of need for clinical studies. So as you may know, in clinical medicine, randomized controlled trials are regarded as the gold standard in terms of assessing and validating any medical applications, whether it's drugs or medical devices. So similarly, these authors argue for the use of clinical trials to validate AI models. In the last phase, they talk about the governance structures, which we covered. So you can start to see even this framework kind of covers the topics I talked about, and that basically means there's a lot of similarity in thinking in the way we, many people who are focusing on the translational aspects. There is already a lot of discourse and happening about, we had enough of discussion of the potential of AI. Now we start to need to discuss about the translational aspects. So I'm glad that people are thinking about it, and a lot of papers and a lot of discussion is happening about this. To end the presentation, we know that healthcare needs AI. Already given you a demonstration of the challenges healthcare faces and how AI can address that. But we also know that there are significant translational issues, and the best way forward is to adopt proposed frameworks, whether it's mine or many others, but definitely there are solutions to address the ongoing issues. Finally, that was indeed a very, very quick run through the issues that AI in healthcare faces and the proposed solutions. And this presentation doesn't do entire justice to what all can be covered. So I recommend you to access my open access articles that you may come across through a simple search, but also my books that have been published. With that, I would like to thank the organizers, but also thank you participants for patiently kind of listening through. I suppose it's time for questions now.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks very much, Professor Sandeep. So we do have a couple of questions here and lots of comments in the chat window, as you can see. So due to the interest of time, I'll skip my questions. I will take the questions from the audience directly. So the first question came from Liang Hu. So with regard to the legalized X-ray image AI analysis in Europe, which company is involved? What is the name of the software platform involved, and which hospitals are implementing such analysis?
So I'm just looking to the question to make sure that I'm addressing it right.
Yeah, they posted 5:31 p.m. If you can look at that question.
Yeah, so basically what I was referring to is this recent CE approval for an autonomous application. So the CE process and the benchmarking process and the quality assurance process is quite complex to be able to be covered in this particular session. But what they do is basically just like as TGA does here in Australia or FDA does in Australia, they basically ascertain whether an AI application is safe to be used in a clinical environment. But again, it depends upon the level of risk that particular application poses or the substitution process. If you have an AI application that doesn't substitute clinical judgment and is being used for advising about lifestyle, wellness, you don't necessarily have to seek regulatory approval. But when you start to enter into the realm of clinical decision making, where you substitute clinical judgment in terms of providing advice about medications that you need to take, or it starts to give you recommendations about a particular treatment, then you do need approval. So here in each country has its own regulatory approval process. As I mentioned earlier, in the United States, we have the Food and Drug Administration, where they have a customized path through which AI applications can submit their applications and have a fast track approval. Indeed, they have approved nearly 30-40 AI applications. But the phenomenon has been quite recent in Europe, and basically the certification process is called a CE process. And this particular application that got recently CE approved was able to do autonomous screening. So it wasn't actually giving you a recommendation about a diagnosis or a treatment. It was just basically being able to detect a particular phenomenon. So that was what I was referring to.
Yeah.
And the
yes. So Liang Hu has come up another follow-up question. So in the latest question. So what is the organization's name that come up with the AI image analysis in EU, in Europe?
Sorry, I can't recollect on the top of my head, but do feel free to email me. I will be able to easily get it later after this session.
Okay, so I'll take maybe one more question. So there's a question asking how's AI's capacity in terms of analysis in EKGs?
Yeah, so what we call is waveform signal analysis, and that's quite advanced too. So again, AI has done significant progress in being able to analyze EKGs, EEGs, electroencephalogram, and so forth, so many other waveform analysis. So pretty mature in that regard too.
Okay, brilliant. So Jackie, due to the interest of time, I will head back to you for the closing of the session today.
Yeah, well, I'll just check with you, Sandeep. If anyone has any other questions, would you mind if they emailed them through to you, or?
Absolutely. Anytime. I'm very happy to have the discussions. I'm available on LinkedIn, and you can also reach out to me my Deakin email. So very happy to entertain those questions.
Yeah, because someone just put in the chat, if you don't mind sharing, if you wouldn't mind sharing your email address, they've just asked, because there were a few more questions, but as Ong Yuan said, in the interest of time, we might need to wrap up there. But thank you so much. It was a fantastic talk, and it's really covered a lot in that short amount of time. And that's why, like I said, there's plenty of questions probably still there. But it was a great talk, and thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate you both inviting me, but also it was really a pleasure to review the translational issues that AI healthcare faces, but also the solutions that are available to address those issues.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And I'll stop the recording now, but thank you, everyone.
Thank you.